When I heard the version of the blind man and the elephant that was read earlier, with the young guide hired to lead the blind men into the clearing to find the elephant, my gut reaction was, why don't they just ask the guide? I mean, duh. Wouldn't it be great if we had a guide who we could simply ask to see if our perceptions corresponded with reality? Someone to check in with from time to time to just say, hey, are we on track here? Is there something that we're missing? The guide is actually the one with the true power in this story, as is the case in many ancient parables. The guide holds the key to unlocking the truth the men in the story are seeking. He knows what an elephant is, and in fact, he does not speak. The guide's perspective would actually have encompassed all of the perspectives of the blind man if he had spoken, as well as solved the argument, possibly. Damn him. That silent, omnipotent character leaving us to simply fend for ourselves and flounder around in our own mess. To a degree, there are people who can serve as this role of guide for us in our lives. People who are not locked into our dramas, who are outside of the system enough that they have a clearer view of what actually might be happening to us and offer us insight to our situation, to the patterns that we repeat. And yet these people too are flawed. But even if the guide in our elephant story would have spoken, that doesn't mean that the men in the story would have necessarily paid him any attention. I mean, why would the men have believed him anyway? He was just a hired guide. He was young, likely not as educated. There are cultural and even situational layers that get in the way of even being able to hear the guide speak. The guide in this story is just part of the background, the task, hired for a specific purpose, to take the men to experience the elephant for themselves. What would he know anyway? It would actually require a new paradigm, considering the guide as a colleague, a participant, and not a means to a predetermined end, not a pawn in their game. It would take thinking completely outside the box to even consider that guide's opinion. So some of what's blinding the men in this story was arrogance, their desire to prove to one another that they were right. They were in a silo, 6 very similar men of a similar age asking a question without really seeking out difference outside of their own context. Now, even if the men had not been blinded by arrogance, even if they had all simply collaborated their own experiences of that elephant and spent some time trying to understand instead of trying to convince, sought their truth in love, so to speak, they could have at least co-created an approximation of an elephant among themselves, a patched together picture of a mud wall and a spear and a rope and a snake and a fan and a areca palm tree or 4. And even then, they would need to stay open to the possibility of more information. An elephant is, of course, more than their combined perceptions added together like a math problem. Bigger, indeed, than the sum of its parts. And so is truth. A set of perceptions, it really is. Correlations, hypotheses, is as close as we'll actually ever get. And yet we can't simply put off our lives, put off our actions until we have all of the information, because we'll never have all of the information. So we have to just act in the meantime. Gather as many perspectives as we can and risk putting our ideas out into the world while still leaving a space, a placeholder for our likely error. It's a lot like a leap of faith. And so this is our lot in life. a cycle of hypothesis and hope, and then humility and humbleness. Or maybe we can consider it this way: it's a cycle of courage and connection, and then correction and compassion. The closest we can actually arrive to the truth is, in fact, that patched together, co-created image of the world. And so indeed, we need one another. The closest we can get to truth is, in fact, probability. Because as observers of the world, even as scientists, mathematicians, historians, even physicists, we cannot get entirely off of our own island, so to speak. And so we have to build bridges to other islands and other lands and make friends with strangers. The elephant story is kind of like trying to see how islands are connected and being on an island. It would do us a lot of good to be able to get that eagle eye view. But we cannot get entirely off our own island, and so we must leave room for our own error, even in areas of our lives where we feel completely certain, even with our most fundamental assumptions. It means we have to hold on to what we think of as truth very loosely and be prepared to reconsider, to adapt, to adjust, to shift, to include broader and broader perspectives. What does it mean to be stuck on our own island? I want to share with you an example of a pretty fundamental American cultural assumption that I'm pretty ready to let go of. How many of you believe that drinking milk is good for your health, or grew up learning that you should drink a couple of glasses of milk a day? High in the air. I want you to see. Look around you. Just look around you for a second. Okay. Good. I mean, I certainly did. It was on the food pyramid, which we've now thrown out, by the way. And now we're looking at the healthy eating food plate. But we've all seen the Got Milk ads everywhere, right? Stars like Jennifer Hudson and Sofia Vergara and Beyonce, all with milk mustaches, right? Olympians and Super Bowl winners. Why wouldn't they do these ads? And likely for cheap, because it's supporting a cause of healthy eating, right? Everybody drinks milk, except for those few folks who are lactose intolerant and can't digest it, those poor dears. But milk is considered to be as American as apple pie. The images in this culture are of cookies needing milk. And I understand that. And all you have to do is go to the grocery store and look at the cereal aisle to know that what most Americans eat for breakfast. Well, the beautiful Colombian actress Sofia Vergara from Modern Family has a Got Milk advertisement showing her standing next to a table with a glass of milk on top, and a caption on the image reads, "Role Mother. To strengthen my modern family, I follow my mama's example. She always set our table with milk, and I do the same." What I've recently learned is that milk drinking is an island perspective. Actually, it's a predominantly Caucasian island perspective. What I didn't know until recently is that almost all Native Americans are lactose intolerant. 90% of Asian Americans are lactose intolerant. 75% of all African Americans are lactose intolerant. And 75% of Jewish, Mexican American adults are also lactose intolerant. So actually, most of America is lactose intolerant. It turns out only 35% of the world can tolerate cow's milk. And that group is mostly Caucasian. It's a fascinating study if you want to go Google lactose intolerance when you get home tonight. So it's not actually very American at all to drink milk, is my point. The standard that has permeated our country's school lunch system and government recommendations is based on 35% of the world's population's influence on policy, production, and practice. And the intertwining of the milk industry and government funding is another reason, and that's another sermon. So milk is good for you is indeed a closed system perspective. And milk ads would have you believe that that is not in fact true, since they seem to be focusing a lot on people of color for their ads. The message seems to be that the right thing to do to be a role model American mother is to give our children milk, when milk drinkers are actually an exception to the rule. It kind of makes you feel guilty if you're not giving your kids milk, right? Just makes you wonder, what is the goal here? It seems to be an example of a lot of resources being spent to convince the world that one part of the elephant is, in fact, the elephant. Does that make sense? So being able to see what it's like from a minority perspective offers true power. Being able to shift roles offers true power. There's a great video, actually, that one of our youth introduced me to yesterday. It's called What If Gay Were Straight? And if you are straight, it will be the best 20 minutes of your YouTube experience life. So I really suggest that you look it up. What If Gay Were Straight? And basically, it's 20 minutes of a drama that was produced, a little short documentary, where a young lady, a girl is born to two moms, which is the norm. And they show it through the view of this young lady going through life, and there's nothing but little women couples and men couples all over the world. And then she goes to her uncle's wedding, of course, to a man, and she's the ring bearer, and she falls in love with the flower boy. And there's this moment where it says, if I had just ignored the feeling that I was having, then I could be considered normal. It's a wonderful, wonderful flip to help bridge a space between two islands and help folks to see really what it might be like to be gay in this world. So actually, one of the most important questions that we can ask ourselves is, when are we trying to convince another person that the part of the elephant that we are experiencing is the whole elephant? When are we investing our energy and our time and our resources going, the elephant is a fan. It's a fan. No, it's a snake. No, it's a fan. Are we making room for others' perspectives? Is the question on the table. Is the one thing in common that we might actually have with one another is that we're all wrong? Paying attention to the lenses through which we examine the world, paying attention to when we substitute our own perception of the world for the world itself can help us get closer and closer to the truth. You see, the world is just out there. It is neither right nor wrong, good nor bad. What is true, what is considered to be true, exists in our description of the world as we experience it. And no one has a monopoly on the truth. The way in which we experience the world changes, in fact, over time. It changes with the more information that we're given. It changes the more we are willing to risk being in relationship with difference. The error that we so often make in describing the world and in relating to one another is so beautifully described by the blind man and the elephant. It is mistaking our description of the world for the world itself, our map of the land for the land itself. So understanding how and when we do this helps us uncover our own frame of reference. Exploring our own culture and our own values helps us to welcome other possibilities and frames into our world. And so true power comes from seeing difference not as a violation, but rather as just more information. Now, our own culture can be very difficult to see. It's like asking a fish about the water that it's swimming in. It's so obvious and so assumed that it's really only revealed to us when we encounter someone so different from ourselves that we're forced to question our own assumptions. And if we're open to that experience, the aha of, oh, there's another way of doing that, or, oh, there's another way of looking at this. It doesn't mean we have to change necessarily how we do things, but now we can actually see our assumptions and increase our choices. When we change the game from who is right and who is wrong to this is how I see it, And this is how I understand you see it. And this is why, seeing both sides, I'm making this choice. That is a game that gains us true power. And so when we consider the capacity to incorporate diversity, when we can include the possibility of what may seem like contradictory evidence and not be paralyzed by that process and choose anyway, that is the stuff of life. That is what shapes our life's experience. That is what the world needs. People who can look at the big picture, include as many perspectives as they can, and risk taking action. Be okay when they're wrong, and keep on keeping on. Poet Marge Piercy wrote, "Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. 3 people are a delegation, a cell, a wedge. With 4, you can play games and start a collective. With 6, you can rent a whole house, have pie for dinner with no seconds, and make your own music. 13 makes a circle. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter. 10,000, a community and your own papers. 100,000, a network of communities. 1,000,000, our whole world. It goes one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they say no. It starts when you say we and know what you mean. And each day you mean one more. We need one another, not just to care for one another, but to learn about the world, to know anything, to seek the truth in love. And the more information from the more vantage points we have, the closer to the truth we will in fact get, and the better decisions we will make. This guide in the story reminds me that sometimes a perspective that you need, or even the truth, can be found in the unlikeliest of places. It also reminds me, or maybe this rings more true to you, that looking back on a particular dilemma, you can often see that what you needed was actually right there all along and you didn't even know it. It's like the ruby slippers. Our daughter, Beckett, is obsessed right now with The Wizard of Oz. And I swear to you, I did not do this to her on purpose. It was of her own volition. So needless to say, I have seen that movie about 30 times in the past 45 days. She's nearly 3, and we have already read the entire novel to her, which she sat patiently and listened to a chapter a night. And she wants it as her 3rd birthday party theme. Now, I thought for sure that this movie would scare Beckett the first time I showed it to her, and it does, but not how I initially believed. The part that she makes us fast forward through is when Dorothy falls into the pig pen at the beginning. And when the mean old lady comes to take the dog away, that's scary. She's scared of things that correspond more easily to her real life perceptions. Not so scared of green-faced witches or flying monkeys. So my partner, Jill, and I have been in many philosophical conversations about the intricacies of the moral of The Wizard of Oz. I know it's totally gay, isn't it? I was just at the gala last night, and I'm thinking, I'm talking about The Wizard of Oz tomorrow. So silly. But when you watch something that many times, it's bound to influence you, right? And so we're curious about how it's influencing her. And the nuances of the message of The Wizard of Oz are somewhat complicated. If you remember, Glinda the Good Witch tells the story at the end of the film that Dorothy had the power to go home all along inside herself and with the magic of the slippers. And when someone in that moment asks Glinda, why didn't you tell her earlier? Great question. Glinda says, oh, well, she wouldn't have believed me anyway, and she had to learn for herself. So, yes, it just plays in my mind, and I can tap it at any moment. So Glenda was a guide of sorts, kind of like this guide that leads them into the jungle to see the elephant, right? Leading Dorothy to experience the elephant. I get that we need to experience it ourselves to draw our own conclusions. Now, maybe she didn't need to go get taken by a witch and nearly killed and have a bunch of flying monkeys after her, but I do get that we need to be on the journey by ourselves. But hopefully, we get to be on the journey with comrades who have brains and heart and nerve. I love the central theme to this story. The thing we are seeking can be found within us. It is so beautiful. Just, of course, as the Scarecrow was pretty witty throughout the entire movie, and the Tin Man was full of empathy and compassion, and the Lion was pretty courageous when push came to shove. The Wizard, a mere man himself, merely honored what they already had inside of them. And of course, the message, there's no place like home. The problem I have with the message of the film is Dorothy's conclusion. She's just radically changed her worldview. Munchkins, trees that throw apples at her, all kinds of witches. She's made a very diverse set of friends. She's danced and sang, learned more about life and herself outside of Kansas in extraordinary ways by, in fact, going outside of herself on an ever-inclusive journey against the matter-of-fact evils in the world, and the journey returns her home. Fantastic. But in the film, and not in the book, Dorothy's conclusion is, I know that if I ever go looking for my heart's desire, I'll never go any further than my own backyard, for if it isn't there, I never really lost it. No. No, no, no. She missed the point. She had to go on the journey. She had to get outside herself to understand herself better. If she had never left, she would have never learned a thing. And in the film, they make it this big wake up from a dream. I mean, she realizes at the very end that really all those diverse friends she met were just her friends back from Kansas in drag. She needs to read the book. And even though there's no place like home, home is better. Our experience of home is enriched, right? We experience it differently when we've left and returned. We have a better understanding of the world when we get out of our comfort zones, team up with a diverse group of folk, and sing and dance our way along the journey. Sound familiar? We're doing a lot of that here. But Dorothy did. She missed the point. It's in our free religious tradition where we invite you to explore the diversity of religious propositions as a means to deepen your understanding of the value of your own. There are some religious traditions who don't get it either, who understand that we need to be able to explore the diversity of the religious experience, even to be able to better understand and value our own perspective. The cost of religious silos is, in fact, mistaking a piece of the whole for the whole itself. Seeing the elephant as a mud wall, or a snake, or a rope, or an areca tree. Confusing one description of religious experience as the only factual one. Confusing the map of the land for the land itself, or dare I say, confusing the idol for God. And so I'm glad you're here seeking the truth in love among a gaggle of diverse friends, singing and dancing your way along the journey. And so on your journey this week, I ask you to hold loosely to those things which you are certain. And in your cycles of hypothesis and hope, and then humility and humbleness, or of courage and connection, and then correction and compassion, question everything. Say we and know who you mean. And just maybe in the background, you'll hear Something that sounds like follow the yellow brick road. Amen.